All right, here we are. This is February 14th, Valentine's Day. And today we talk about the next area after the divorce, which if you remember, what did I say about divorce? That's the easy part. Getting divorced is easy. And then the fight starts. So you get divorced, the court agrees to it, then the fight starts. Well, the first fight usually is not this. This isn't usually the first fight, what we're going to cover now and today's class. The part about spousal support, property division, sometimes we call it property distribution, or separation agreement is related because it has similar concepts. I do want to tell you, I put this entire outline in the Blackboard so that you could go look there, because there's a lot of stuff we probably really aren't going to cover specifically, because it's a lot of factors that you would need to apply in order to know how to determine, when you would grant spousal support and what we would distribute as property division after a divorce. Okay, so I just want to cover that a little bit with you, and I put it all in there for you so you could look at it, because you'll probably be responsible for it subsequently. All right, but I'm going to give you an assignment about that, so you'll work through those things too. Okay. All right. For today's class, I told you to file a divorce, right, in 2 states. And so what did you do to file a divorce in those states? Hypothetically, right? You didn't have to actually file a divorce on Valentine's Day. It just worked out that way, by the way. What did you do? How did you file it? What did you know? How did you figure out what to do?
I just Googled it for West Virginia, and I asked, divorce forms for West Virginia, but, and it took me to the judiciary for the state and to the area where you actually plug in all your information.
Okay, so you Googled it, and you got to the court's website, and you found a form that said divorce packet forms or something, probably.
I don't know if that's right, but that's what I found.
And then it said divorce petition or petition for divorce. And it was a fillable PDF, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you filled it in.
Had a double attorney.
It was really difficult.
No.
It wasn't.
Getting
it to keep the information into. Yeah. Yes. And then if you'd have just printed it out, signed it, and given it to the court, it probably wouldn't have been too big a deal, right? I think it would have just printed out, and you could have just taken it to court. No, there's no.
Yeah.
Okay, so we go into that whole process, and so I'll punt that up for you. I happen to know that these exist already in the world, so I just go straight to them this way without having to Google them this time. And I went to family court forms, divorce packet forms, and there's a petition for divorce in the 7 pages, right? And so you go over this and you just fill in the information, right? It's pretty simple, isn't it? Yeah. What do you notice about what you have to do in this form?
You have to really establish jurisdiction. I noticed that was a big part of it, the big part of the first part anyway.
Okay, you had to establish the jurisdiction of the court to do what?
To even be able to file for custody of your children, or to be able to file for divorce in West Virginia, don't you?
Yeah, you have to, in order for it to be brought in West Virginia, you have to establish it ought to be brought there, right? What is the main basis that you would be brought in West Virginia court for divorce? This is the main reason. You are a resident of West Virginia, right? That's the main thing. Or you were married there.
Right.
And one of you lived there now. Okay, so there's a couple different reasons, basically. So either the petitioner has lived here for a year, or the respondent has lived here for a year, or you were married here and at least one of them lives there at any time. So you have to do all that. Then you have to establish number 2, you establish venue, right? That you're in the proper county.
You do that at the top too.
Right, because you don't know yet. You're assuming because you live in that county that you go to that county, right? Which usually makes sense if you reside in that county. Okay, you go in. That's annoying that that thing popped down. Petitioner currently resides in the county. Respondent lives where? Why do you need to know that is? Look at this one. It has this interesting, you're out of state, right? But you may not have had that issue, but it listed on this pre-filling form, right? That's pretty nice. Okay, it asks you where you live or last lived together. It asks you when, right? When did you last live together? Okay, and that separation has been continuous and uninterrupted. We remember there's a difference in Ohio, West Virginia on what that means, right? Okay, are you under 18? It asks you things about whether or not the court can exercise jurisdiction over you personally, because you may not, we're worried if you're, you may not currently, you might be in prison or something like that. One of the things that you might have is that you are in the military. There's a little bit different rules for that. You don't see that too often, really. Who are your kids? Okay, what are we missing so far? We go, who are you? Where do you live? Who are your kids? Do you have health insurance? Have you ever been involved in this kind of stuff before? Is there another action pending? What have we still not figured out yet? Is there some kind of domestic violence or sexual abuse involved, right? We're still going all this. Okay, what are we missing? The reason for the divorce. That's what Brian tells us. The reason for the divorce. We go through a lot of crap and we haven't even figured out what it is, why we're filing it. We probably know that personally, don't we? Now I want you to look at this page carefully. This is where we get into some of the reasons for divorce. But really, we don't get to reasons until almost the bottom of the number. Can you all see this form all right? What is it asking you for? Let me show you first. What's number 15? Check all the following that you believe apply to your case. For these reasons, the petitioner believes that it's in the best interest that only one person. So you're at the children part. But look at the rest here. What do you notice that's different on this page from all the rest of the numbered items? What's interesting on this form? Isn't there a box you don't even have to check?
20.
Number 20.
I know, and I thought,
why doesn't it have a box to check? Well, why doesn't it? It's a given. Is it a given?
I don't know.
What if you're only filing because the respondent inflicted cruel and inhuman treatment upon the petitioner, which has destroyed or tended to destroy the mental and physical well-being of the petitioner?
But that's not
That's why I'm doing it.
But that's not an irreconcilable difference.
Okay, it's not an irreconcilable. It sounds like it.
Yeah.
It's automatically that, right? Pretty much the fault grounds lead you to believe that irreconcilable differences have arisen, right? We don't live together anymore for 1 year or more. Probably irreconcilable differences, right? They don't even give you the option. So did you allege that in your petition for divorce? Did you allege that irreconcilable differences have arisen?
I said no fault. That's probably redundant, isn't it?
What'd you put it down here under other grounds for divorce? Okay, you can do that.
No.
Why? Because you were uncomfortable with the fact that number 20 didn't have a box check. I think number 20 should have a box pre-checked that you can't uncheck. That would make more sense, because right now it looks like, because our brains don't function this way, okay? Our brains don't function to read all of this, what we call boilerplate in law, a bunch of pre-printed forms. We're not very good at our brains processing that stuff. So the fact that that one's not checked, we don't even read it, right? When you buzz through these, I'm not saying when you did your work, but I'm saying but maybe even then, when you buzz through those, you don't even read that one because it doesn't look like something you have to do, right? I think it's a bad way to do the form, but the point is you can't uncheck that box. That is an automatic. If you're filing for divorce, you have to allege irreconcilable differences. You can also allege some fault grounds, right? And why would you do that together? we talked about that last time. Why would you do that together? Why would you always do irreconcilable differences? But why might you also, in almost all of them, file a fault ground too? In case of something, right? There's something that may happen that you still want to be divorced, you personally, maybe not the respondent, but you who files this. Why might you click one of these other boxes? In case the respondent does what? Yeah, disagrees or doesn't agree that irreconcilable differences are occurred. So now you're going to say, we haven't lived together for 1 year or more. Okay, we still want to be divorced. You see the point? Anyway, that one's really not up for negotiation. So why does the Supreme Court promulgate such a thing in this form? Just to make it clear, right? They just do it so that you always have alleged that, even though you didn't. That way it's always in there. Because otherwise, if you didn't check that box, theoretically, under the civil procedure rules or the rules of practice and procedure for family court, if you don't do that, you didn't allege it. So if you can't agree to it, that means that it wouldn't be a ground for divorce. You'd have to find a fault ground. And on procedural grounds, you would almost kick out most divorces because no one would necessarily know to think that click that box. Lawyers would know to always do it. Well, maybe. Most of the time, lawyers would know to most of the time do it, right? But a pro se person may not. And so we don't want to have those technical grounds. Because then you'd have some lawyer come in and argue you didn't allege a non-fault ground, so tough luck, right? Okay, so I just want to throw that one out. So you did that, you filed it. That shouldn't have been remarkably hard. Maybe there was a technology issue, but it wasn't hard to file for divorce, right? It was very simple, I hope. I hope it was very simple for you to learn to file for divorce. Most people in West Virginia that are involved in some version of practice are going to come in contact with this, or someone who asks you, what do you do, right? Okay, that's pretty much how it works. You're going to have somebody who will ask you about filing for divorce, or what do you do, and all that. And you're going to be so knowledgeable that you're really going to want to charge. So just say you don't know and move on, right? Okay. So then I had to do that. Now in Ohio, what did you do? Was it a little harder in Ohio, or was it the same?
It was easier.
It was easier. Why was it easier? Because it was a higher result in Google?
No. It was shorter. It was.
The form was shorter.
And it didn't require quicker. And it didn't require a lot of, it didn't even touch, all I did was mention real property, what time or personal property was. It mostly just dealt with children and wanting to be divorced.
And there was a difference between, like, you could file with having children or without having children. I think that cut down on what it.
Yeah, that's pretty nice, isn't it? You can do that in, yeah, actually we designate the cases differently, except we treat them the same in West Virginia.
Okay.
So we record them as divorce without children, but we treat them identically. We tend, though, to have a temporary order in a case with children. We have a temporary order or a temporary hearing sooner because it takes a little bit more priority, but we treat them the same. I think that's odd. Why do we even designate them if we're not really going to do anything different? All right, somewhere in one of these boxes I can check and find the form. Do you remember how'd you all do? You Googled it, didn't you?
I just did the file for divorce in Ohio.
I think it's on this
And
site
then it
somewhere.
brings up the one with kids first.
Yeah.
Now you went to the official form, I hope.
Yes.
Okay.
The domestic relations. Yeah, there.
Okay. So I wanted you to go here to figure out, here's where you file your divorce with children and domestic relations forms, and then you get them all there. They are. Uniform domestic relations form, affidavit 1, you got all this stuff. Now, look over here on this right-hand side, and I want to point out something that's different. First of all, there's different filings based on with or without children, right? And then there's this next area called dissolution without children, dissolution with children. What's that? What's divorce and what's dissolution? Didn't you remember in the first chapter they said we changed the language, it's so much more flowery now, we just are dissolving a marriage. We're not divorcing it. That sounds brutal, right? In Ohio they do too. What's the difference?
Dissolution is where you agree to everything, separate everything, divorce is when you fight it out.
Yeah. In Ohio, a divorce is a contested divorce. A dissolution is an uncontested divorce. In West Virginia, we just call them contested or uncontested, and we treat them the same. Isn't that funny? Shouldn't we treat them a little differently? If you are getting divorced, you agree to everything. We want that, right? Yay. You hate each other now, but you're going to agree? Awesome, right? This is good news. But we don't like encourage that result in the court side of it. We do after you get there, but we don't give you like this paperwork that you pretty much file jointly and you submit it to the court, and the court basically stamps their signature on it. Not totally that simple, but more or less. Okay, if you can agree, it's pretty much that simple. They don't want involved in it anymore. If you can agree to everything, bam, it's over. You can always come back to enforce that agreement to family court and all that. But I wanted to raise that as an issue for you so you understood those differences. Okay? Okay, so the next thing I wanted to do is talk about the case. Okay? So do you read the case for today? All right. So let me ask you a few questions about the case. First is, who are the parties? Okay, first is, what court is it in? It says it right at the top. That's like a first thing. Bam. In the Supreme Court of Appeals. Of what state? Come on now. What is the case about? What are their names? Snyder is their name. Holy crap, you didn't read that part? I gave you all this information. You didn't have to read it. You had to read the assignment. Oh, disregard. Snyder versus Snyder. Who does it involve? They have the same last name, so we can get a good idea. And this is family law class. What kind of case is it? A divorce action, right? No, not in West Virginia, it's not. It's clearly not an agreed to divorce, right? How do we know that? What's the problem in this case? Okay, it's an appeal, so they're still mad, so they can't be. No, you could still appeal a dissolution because you're trying to enforce it and the person doesn't want to pay. And I agreed to pay, but I don't have any money, so you know.
But still, that's a clue. Could be.
Okay, it's a clue. But it's not an agreed situation, right? We know it's even more classic than that. Okay, let's not go into the procedural points. But what about the actual facts in the case tell us they're not agreeing?
Looks like if there were no residencies, that's what it is.
Okay.
Looks like a disagreement over jurisdiction.
Right.
Okay.
Residency.
How do we know there's a disagreement over jurisdiction? Where were these folks married? What state were they married in? Let's go with that. Isn't that important?
Yeah.
Come on. We just went over the West Virginia form. Do we care where people are married? Yep, it asks you. Why do we care where they're married?
They're married.
Okay, they were married in Maryland, in Garrett County, right? Why do we care? It has something to do with West Virginia's jurisdiction potentially. So we want to know, were you married? And where? And when?
Oh, shoot.
Okay, so that happens. Where do these people live? For some part of their marriage, maybe for about 20 years, they live together in different states, right? About on or about 1993, 94, what happens? They are living in New Jersey. Then what happens?
He goes to, they go to Illinois, or a colleague of his asked Mr. Snowden, wow, goes to Illinois,
They go to Illinois?
or does he go to Illinois? 'Cause it.
I don't know. That's what Case will tell us, won't it?
He goes.
He goes to Illinois with a friend, right? Maybe more than one friend. You agree? Maybe more than one friend he goes to Illinois with, but he does anyway. And apparently, they end up in West Virginia. Where in West Virginia they end up? Okay. Why did they end up in West Virginia? There was a home for sale.
What it says.
Yes, I mean that's true. But I mean you don't just randomly, or maybe people do. They're like, is there a home for sale?
Just the way this case seems to be going, it would surprise me.
Okay, so they're moving. He moves in with he goes to Illinois with a colleague. And how they end up in West Virginia? They were in Maryland. They got married in Maryland. They were in New Jersey. He goes to Illinois. Why in the world are we in West Virginia? He wants to retire here, so he sent her first to Bridgeport. He just really likes his townhomes in Bridgeport in the 90s. We didn't even know there were remember, there was nothing in Bridgeport in the 90s. That was just where the interstate connected with 50, right? There was none of all that stuff up on the hill that we know now, right? I'm talking about Bridgeport. Brian thinks that it's because of meth in West Virginia. I doubt it, because he didn't stick around. Why? How do they end up in West Virginia? You need to ask these questions when you're reading it for the first time after we're done with class. Read why. You should ask, why in the heck are they in West Virginia?
They intended to return to work. They wanted to work in West
Well, that's what he said.
But why? What would draw them to West Virginia?
The glass.
Meth. In the 90s, we didn't just call it meth then. It was more recreational, I think, at that point, wasn't it? Yes. It was more of a party drug as opposed to. Do what? Get the answer. Why are they in West Virginia? Everybody wants to retire to the sunny Bridgeport Hill. I mean, come on.
Seriously.
It's like he was retiring and returning to West Virginia.
Why? Why was he going to West Virginia? Who in the world was in West Virginia? His wife was there, but she hadn't been there. She was in New Jersey.
Miss, I don't know.
Miss Snyder, that's why he went. Okay? So we'll go with that. Why do people normally move somewhere else that they weren't living? They go for a couple reasons, right? They go for a job, or a woman, yeah, okay, or a man, and we'll go with either. There's usually another reason. They're from there, right? They come back
Hello.
because they're from there. Who's from there? Miss Snyder is. Her family, they're visiting her family, apparently, in that area. This is in the case, people.
I did, but I thought you were gonna.
You don't wonder? I always wondered. So this guy works for a glass manufacturer. Why in the world are they in West Virginia? Yeah, and marbles and all kinds of stuff, right? And then we lost the marbles. Oh, shoot. I digress. So they move to West Virginia, but does he move? No, he buys her a nice place, right? Because he's going to retire there. Sounds good. And he revisits her on long weekends from time to time. Are you all getting as fishy as I am about this situation? He moves to Illinois. He moves her into West Virginia near her family.
He's not.
And he's going to retire, but he never really retires. And he just visits her on long weekends.
He's not already.
Well, I don't know. I wondered that too. I thought, well, does he have a family in Illinois he's been wanting to meet back up with, or what? We don't have to impugn all of his credibility or his character, right? But we can assume that he didn't want to be married a whole lot anymore, right? Well, yeah, we know because they're getting divorced. So what does he do that makes her mad? Yeah, he files for divorce in Illinois. Why does he do that? It's where he's living. Okay, so from 1994 until about 1997, I think, is that right? 97? They're not living together, really. He visits her on long weekends.
Actually, this is a continuous basis. I wonder if that means at that point that they can see each other alone.
He alleges a continuous basis. She says that's not true because he would come back periodically to West Virginia. And then when family and friends would ask, when are you moving back? He said, I'm going to retire anytime. He made everybody think, including her, that they were still married, right? But then he alleges, no, we were separated on a continuous basis for the last 3 years. I file in Illinois. Why? Because I'm in Illinois. What is he doing? Why is he in Illinois? And why is he filing for divorce there? Think about the rest of the case. What else is going on in the case when you answer that question?
He's trying to keep his earnings away from her.
He's trying not to pay her spousal support, right? He could do that. You just go move out, go live in another state, pretend you're still married to your wife, and file for divorce to get away with not distributing property or doing anything, right? What was his thought process here? I was providing for her. I bought her a nice townhouse in Bridgeport in the 90s. No offense to anyone that's from that part of the state, but it had a lot has happened there since then. Like this big federal complex dropped over there in that area, right?
Was there even a McDonald's over there back in the
Yeah, there was a McDonald's. When I was growing up, when you got off one of the exits in Clarksburg, they actually had a natural gas station. You pull right in and you get natural gas for your car. They pump it right in. Yeah. Yeah. So it started building up. So that might be one reason they were there. FBI, but it got a lot bigger since then. I mean, NASA came around, NOAA, and all those fancy things, right? And then all those restaurants and all that stuff. I mean, there wasn't much there. Anyway, you get my point.
Drops her off.
Yeah, nice townhouse. It's really great. Okay, so why does he file for divorce in Illinois? And can he?
Do they have residency requirements?
Well, we don't know. We don't need to worry about that because he's complaining about the West Virginia divorce, right? What's his complaint? Let's go with that. What is Mr. Snyder's complaint in this case? Why is he in the Supreme Court? West Virginia Supreme Court.
He tried claiming West Virginia courts lack personal jurisdiction.
Yeah, he's saying, I'm an Illinois resident. You can't tell me what to do, right? What's ironic about that position?
Putting the same for her, but if she's in West Virginia, no one's not a resident of me.
Yeah, he is trying to get an advantage in the same point that he just did to her. He's in Illinois and he files a divorce. So, and she could complain the same thing, right?
Right.
But is that true? Can she complain? What did the Illinois court do? It granted an ex parte divorce. She wasn't there. Why can you do that? You can get an ex parte divorce. Why can we do that? Do you remember talking about that last time? Who has jurisdiction over what state has jurisdiction over a marriage? Wherever either of the spouses lives, because it's a personal right to either spouse. While you're married, wherever you are, is where the marriage is located. Okay? That's a constitutional due process issue, but that's what they determine. Illinois can grant the marriage or the dissolution of the marriage, right? Divorce. They can grant that. Why? Because they have jurisdiction over the divorce. Do they have jurisdiction over the house in Bridgeport, West Virginia? No, they don't, right? So can Illinois grant a divorce? Yes, it can. But can it do anything about spousal support? Nope. Can it do anything about property division? Nope. Could it do child support and child custody? No. Well, if he had the kid, yes. Okay.
About the domicile, isn't it?
Well, the kid then has a residence, and the court would only have jurisdiction over where the kid's located. Okay. So that can factor in. Well, that's not an issue here. So anyway, you get the point that he's trying to get an advantage out of the Illinois court by doing what? Saying you never came over here and contested the divorce. Only Illinois can grant the divorce. You can't get anything else from me. We're divorced. So she complains. So obviously, at the same time he files an action in Illinois, he tells her we're divorced. She's like, what? And she goes and files a West Virginia divorce, right? Makes sense. Because she's like, well, I don't work. I don't know they make that obviously clear here.
They did. She's a stay-at-home.
Oh, yeah, that's right. She was at home mom. So she's at home. So they say she doesn't work outside the home. Okay. In any event, she's like, you can't just leave me destitute. We know that's against the rules, right? You can't leave them destitute. And so she asks the West Virginia court to do what? Take jurisdiction. Not over the divorce. She doesn't care if West Virginia grants a divorce. She only cares because that's done under full faith and credit in the Constitution. Full faith and credit, other states' orders and jurisdiction, all that stuff. Our court will grant the divorce, allow or accept the one that was entered by Illinois, and grant it. It's over. Okay. Our court, the West Virginia court here, will grant equitable distribution of the marital assets. Grant spousal support. They do that in the amount of $2,500 and order him to pay attorney fees. What's his complaint? I don't live in West Virginia. You can't do that to me. What's the court tell us? Yes, we can. Okay, why? That's easy. Yes, you can. Why? Because West Virginia is the only state that has jurisdiction over both the marriage and the marital property. Do I? Yeah.
Subject matter, yeah.
It's the only one. It has the other piece, that divorce, that could float, and you can get that anywhere because we accept as a principle of law that if somebody wants to be divorced and they can get divorced wherever they live, you can't be forced to continue to be married. That's the idea, right? And sometimes we've seen it over history. Some of the cases talk about where one spouse just abandons and leaves, and then they won't officially do it, and they always show back up, and then they come and go. And then the bad thing about history in marriage is that the spouses could get responsible for the contractual obligations of the other spouse, right? Like a partnership. General partnership law would say that. You don't want them to bind you to stuff, right? You can't go out and do all the things that you could do that could harm you in the financial sense and stuff like that. So we let you end. That's also important to what is the acquisition of marital property in the meantime. Okay? So any questions about that case? By the way, how long were the people married? Year? 2 years?
Let's say it has to be
Couple.
a while.
10? How long's a while? 8?
Well, I'm just thinking because as many times as he moved around from state to state.
Okay. They tell us, don't they? When were they married and when did they file for divorce? Shouldn't you know? I mean, come on. You should be interested. Why? How long did they get married? How long were they married? I'll tell you this, it factors in the court's mind. When it comes into all this stuff, how long were you married? If this couple has been married 2 years, did we get here? No, we don't. Because the court and the parties themselves are like, there isn't much to decide. We move on. It had to have some significant length to it. It's 24 years, by the way.
Yeah, sure, things happen.
If you're married for that long, what is the point in even getting a divorce? I've always wondered that, like, you've already.
In this
been
case,
married.
there's something going on we don't know.
Right. Another family.
He moves to Illinois and he only comes every so often. I don't know. People forgot to sow their wild oats, or they have midlife crises, right? I don't know. There's all kinds of reasons. You know, people just, they don't, after their kids are grown, they don't have as much in common as they once thought they did, right? I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. It's a good point. I don't know the answer. I'm speculating. All kinds of people get divorced, we know that, and you know, there's all kinds of reasons. Okay, any questions? It's just weird. Yeah, it's weird. But you see it from time to time as people move, especially as we get more mobile. This is an old case, as far as that's concerned. Because people can live, I mean, I know people that have spouses that live in other states and like rarely, and then they come for Christmas. I mean, yeah, kind of interesting. I mean, really, I've seen it. I'm surprised, but it is what it is. But with job opportunities and, you know, mobile opportunities and all that kind of stuff, I mean, that's where people are. They go where they can find work and all that. All right. I'm not the counselor when it comes to this stuff. I can't answer. I don't know. Different kind of counselor. All right, moving on. So we don't have a lot of time to cover all the rest of this, but the good news is it's pretty simple. Okay? Are you entitled to spousal support?
Are we still talking about the case?
No, we're talking about generally, okay, the divorce has been granted, now the fight starts, and now we're fighting. What are we fighting about? We're fighting about the first thing that we can move to, which is the easier thing, in my view. It can get somewhat complicated, but this is the easier thing because it's a little bit less emotional than the kids part. Okay, so let's talk about spousal support and property division. Okay, spousal support is the new term for alimony because alimony is associated with only being paid to the wife. So we have eliminated that as the rule, but we still refer to it as alimony all the time because we don't see it as often as we might have. As you might realize, we have it more often than we realize that husbands also get spousal support. Okay, it does occur. It's just in our minds it's less often. It is less often. Okay, so actually I heard an article a report on the radio on my way in about that, specifically about why, you know, the wife stayed home and raised the kids when she was making more money, and they would have been more economically stable, financially stable if he would have stayed home. It was kind of an interesting article or report. Okay, so my question is, are you entitled to spousal support?
It matters how long you've been married.
Okay, it matters, but are you entitled? You always get it. Is it something that there's like a set of things, like if you are this, this, and this, you get it, bam.
It's not an unalienable right.
Actually, it's rare.
Okay, it's fairly rare, especially in a two-worker household, right? It's getting rarer for sure. Are you entitled to it? No, basically not. I think there's only the limited area are you entitled to spousal support? Only if you would become that public charge or destitute, okay? You have an obligation, it's called the Family Expense Act, it's like an old like British law, I believe, is the Family Expense Act, or the concept of it, that you have a responsibility that once you're married that you have to pay for your family, okay? That's the concept of alimony, that once you become married, even if that marriage ends, you still have the responsibility to pay for the things that your family requires, okay? That is the ultimate concept of this area. Okay, so are you entitled to it? Probably only in that limited circumstance. Do we have some things that we can decide when it comes to alimony? Like when would we get it? Yes. Basically, one of the big ones is how long was someone married? That is a big one. If someone comes in, so again, when you read a case like this, it matters, right? how long these people have been married, because that's a factor in the whole point. She's looking for spousal support, right? Okay, it matters. If somebody, I'll tell you this, if somebody comes to me and asks, and I ask them, well, how long were you married? And they say under 10 years, it's going to be a hard chance you're going to get alimony. It's not impossible or anything. It's just not a very likely scenario. Okay, what are the criteria? Generally, we look at a few things. Little marital property, okay, so not a lot of money combined to distribute amongst the two, because we generally say that an asset can generate its own money. A disparity in wealth, so one person can make more than the other, has more than the other, and the more needy party has limited income potential because they don't have job skills, they're older, or they have a kid, need to care for the children. Okay, so there's an example of someone who maybe is, but we're going to combine all those together, by the way, in one. Those are factored all together. You're going to say someone that was married, let's say 8 years, and has 2 children under the age of 5, there's very little marital property, probably because you've been married 8 years and you got 2 kids under 5. There's a lot of times hard to accumulate much marital property. Okay, one person works, let's say full-time, the other person works part-time, let's say 10 to 20 hours a week, okay, and they're taking care of the kids. Well, it gets to be difficult, right? Plus you have a lot of expense to work if you're working, right? Both parties are working, because you've got to have kids put someplace that costs money, generally. One way or another, it costs. Okay, that person, so then you have one making more than the other, and the other one doesn't have a lot of income potential because there are 2 kids. Someone has to run them to their activities. Really, for the next, if they're under 2 or under 5, you're looking at least 15 more years of running kids around, right? That will limit your potential income. All right, those people might be out. You might look at some version of alimony. Okay, just as a point. But generally, we don't see alimony until you're over like 20. I mean, I'm just throwing out generalizations. You've been married more than about 20 years, they're more likely to see it. And the increase in the disparity in wealth. So if somebody makes $1 million a year and the other one, can make $25,000 a year, you're probably going to see alimony in that case too. There's lots of factors.
So 16 years is out the window.
No, 16 years is a good shot, provided there's little marital property to distribute. There's disparity in wealth, so there's an ability to pay. That's what disparity in wealth means. There's an ability to maintain some level of your lifestyle plus support. Okay, and yeah, but 16's out there. It's a good number. Okay, so you understand those concepts? It's pretty simple. Alimony is pretty simple. So if you go look at the statutes and say, well, how do I know when you determine what spousal support is? Are you going to get any way to like calculate income and come up with a number? No, not at all, right? It's like totally discretionary for the court. There's no set number. You don't calculate it. That's totally different than child support, by the way. You add the incomes together, you divide the amount of custodial time you get, and bam, there's the number. Okay? That's how you determine child support. Spousal support, there isn't even a rule of thumb about it. You just have to guess. Like the court comes up with something that sounds reasonable. What are your household expenses? What can you contribute toward? That kind of stuff. Okay, so just understand that general concept. There's not a lot of property. Somebody has an ability to pay, and the other one has limited ability to make up the difference. And I think that's the way to look at it. Okay, there are 2 main types. We used to have something called permanent, and those are the ones you're aware of, probably most likely. Permanent spousal support was where someone got it from the end of the marriage until death. Okay, that was permanent spousal support. West Virginia statutes still refer to permanent spousal support. It doesn't mean forever. But what permanent meant was either, we usually know it is until remarriage of the one receiving it. Okay, and then the other usually condition was the death of the one paying it. All right, so those were usually the 2 things that cut it off. And you'll see people still, there are people that receive permanent spousal support, alimony, they get it till they die. Very unlikely to be ordered in the last 10 years, though. Those would be older ones. The general rule is you'll rarely see spousal support paid over 10 years, longer than 10 years. And you really, about the minimum, about the max anymore is about 4. Why 4?
Is that assuming that the person will have the ability to change their circumstances and do better for themselves?
Right?
Is that part of
They
it?
could change their circumstances in 4 years. What in particular about 4 years? Why 4? Why not 5? Why not 2? What do we normally say you could do in 4 years? You could get a bachelor's degree in something.
Oh, right.
That's the reason. So what that is known as is rehabilitative spousal support. Rehabilitative spousal support. What's the purpose of it? It's paying to get you essentially through college. That's the concept. So that then you can go and then whatever happened, so a rehabilitate whatever you didn't get during the marriage, okay? The classic cases of those are that you forewent the opportunities to go to college when you were younger in order that you would raise kids or take care of the household or whatever that was, and that at the end, we want to put you out and make you as independent as possible. That's the policy behind it, okay? So that's what rehabilitative is. Makes good sense, right? Encourage the change. Encourage independence. That's the concept. Okay, the other one is called reimbursement, and it's also known as restitutional. I think there are probably other terms for all these, but reimbursement. Okay, what does reimburse mean? Pay you back. Okay, the classic example of reimbursement is one spouse works and pays while the other one becomes something through their degree and their early marriage. It's usually an early marriage. Common cases of this: lawyers, doctors, accountants. Like those are the classic cases where basically you're married. One person, they're both working at some time. Let's say when you get married, one decides I'm going to go to med school. The other one works, pays all the household expenses. A lot of times tried to keep it lower debt and all those things. It was a good benefit to the family. Why would you be willing to invest that into it? For the income potential later, right? So you've invested. It's just like investing in stock. I give you $10,000 now because I expect it to be $100,000 later, right? So what happens though if you end the marriage after I put my investment in? You don't get your return, right? It's simple dollars, really. That's what reimbursement is. Basically, I should get the benefit of that investment that we made as a couple. You'll see it sometimes in sales jobs, especially traveling sales. Folks they took care of all the things back at the house while the other person was traveling all the time, trying to build their book of business. They didn't make great money. And then now it's 20 years later and that person is really cashing in, right? They've got 20 years in sales. They've honed their skill, their book of business, all that. Now their income is way up there, and now they want a divorce, right? I don't want to share. That's what happens a lot of times also in reimbursement support. So I wanted to throw those couple things in. By the way, the key word for today is the word alimony in gross. Alimony in gross. Basically, that is known as a lump sum alimony payment. I throw that out to tell you this. Lump sum alimony looks like property distribution. Okay? What is lump sum, or what is alimony in gross? It is when I say I would pay you so many dollars for 10 years, but I'm just going to give it to you in one big cash out. I got an inheritance now, or whatever it is. I don't want to deal with you anymore, is one way to think of it. I'm going to give you the money now, and then we won't have this monthly or annual interaction. You get it? We're done here, right? Okay, so that's what alimony in gross is. The problem with alimony in gross is it looks like property distribution. Okay, so this is a good way to transition into property division. We're running really short on time at this point, but let's talk about the other big area, and we can do it quickly. Property division is done basically when we combine all the marital property that we acquired during our marriage, and we divide it evenly. Almost impossible to do. So we change the word. Instead of calling it equal, we call it equitable because it sounds better and it's roughly the same. Okay? When you divide your property, your marital property at divorce in half, roughly in half, is that a taxable event?
Would that be considered like a liquidation of your assets, kind of like in bankruptcy? Or?
No, it's not, because it's not truly a liquidation. It's really like if a partnership that was dissolved. Should you have to pay tax if I just get my half? No. I acquired it, we acquired it together, 50-50. Okay, trust you. That's the assumption in a marriage, by the way, is that when you're married, all of the assets that you acquire, and the debts, unfortunately, that you acquire during the marriage, including all of your income, okay, there's a few things that you'll see here that are not marital, but we assume all of that stuff you acquire during the marriage is marital property. So you contributed to its whole, half of the whole, okay? Should you be taxed on it when we split it up? No. Property division is not a taxable event. Is spousal support taxable? Yes. And it's a tax deduction. So if I have to pay spousal support to my ex, I can deduct that from my income taxes. And she has to claim it. Okay? So, is there a benefit to a alimony and gross payment? It looks like property division. It's a non-taxable event, right? So the IRS is going to look at it and say, is that really alimony? You're wanting to call it alimony. Why you want to call it alimony? I can deduct it from my taxes, right? So the person paying it wants to deduct it. The person receiving it doesn't want to claim it, so they want to make it property division, right? It's a non-taxable event. So those two things combined, well, the problem we get is we have a dispute sometimes about. So those factors in, the IRS will look at it. Typically, if you do something like an end gross payment, it's really property distribution. Basically, what we're saying is alimony and gross is, I'm calling it that because I'm going to take this chunk of money that's marital property, and in order to give it to you and get my tax deduction, I'm going to go whoop and plop it over here. I want to call it alimony for that reason. There are good reasons for the receiver of that alimony and gross to call it alimony too, because they can claim it on their income, which is helpful if they have none, because it would help them get loans or stuff like that. So if you claimed it as alimony as the receiver, let's say you need to buy a house, you want to buy a car, and you don't have any money, you want it to be called alimony because it's income, right? So there's a benefit in receiving it, even though it's kind of, normally you would say no, it's not really a benefit because on that sense, because you have to pay. We'll get to the other point about what's the taxability of child support payments when we get to that point. So let's move on before we get to the end. I know we're running out of time, but property division basically is done. We only divide marital property. It's easier to determine what is not marital property than it is to determine what is marital property. So this is one of those classics, like, what's the definition of the opposite? And that is, we call that separate property. Property is everything, real and personal, tangible and intangible, okay? So it's anything that you acquire. And what we mean is, what we have to determine really is, when did we acquire it? If it was before the marriage, it's separate property. If it was after, most states use the DOS, which is the date of separation. So you remember, to the West Virginia form didn't ask you, when's the last time you lived together? That's the date of separation. Everything that happens after that, in terms of acquisition of assets and debts, is no longer marital, okay? So that's what we worry about those times. A DOF is date of filing and DOJ is date of judgment. What those mean are, different states use those definitions. Most states use DOS. West Virginia and Ohio both use the separation date. because you shouldn't be able to move out and then like acquire debts. That's usually the bigger one, acquire debts at that point. Okay. How you title it. Okay. So if a lot of married folks, you'll see will have their cars while they clearly bought them together. They don't change the name. They don't make them an ors. You should probably have an or. It's easier to transfer them. But normally we don't title them jointly. We just title them in one or the other's name. That's not conclusive. Basically, anything that you acquired together during the marriage is marital property. So whatever you call it is irrelevant. Okay, just as an interesting point. So if you call it your sole owner or together, you contributed to the buying of that asset. It is what it is. It's still marital property. So what is separate property? It's stuff before, during the marriage by gift, during the marriage by will. Okay, that's when you inherit money. That, and then during the marriage in exchange for separate property. That's if you sold something that was your separate property. Okay, you get to keep the dollars. Passive income. Anyway, you get the idea. Basically, the concept is that most things that you acquire during the marriage are marital property. Okay, the ones everyone always asks for, what if I get a gift from my spouse? Is that marital property? Not usually. Okay, can be, but not usually marital. Okay, if I receive an inheritance from a family member, that's not marital. Okay, and all that. Those are the two ones you usually see. Insurance proceeds, that's a good one a lot of times, like in a car wreck or something like that. You were to receive a personal injury claim and you receive, usually that is not marital property. There's actually a separate claim in law for that. The non-marital, to make it the more marital version, is loss of consortium damages, right? That's when the spouse receives those separately. That indicates a little bit to you what it is, okay? In any event, you look at all those things, and that is an issue that people will put up. Well, that was really mine. That was really, now it's all together. Now, the one that we see in today's world, and has to do a lot with like student loan debt or debt period, debt you acquire prior to marriage. What we do then is when you are married, usually use marital assets to pay down debt. Okay, student loan is a classic example of it. So, for instance, in my marriage, we combine our incomes, and our combined income goes to pay down my student loan debt primarily. Okay, well, how do we calculate that in the event of divorce? It's complicated, but every dollar that goes in goes to my side as an asset. So let's say that we've paid $10,000 in our marriage thus far to my student loan debt. I have to claim that as an asset, and so it'll affect the equal distribution. So in the end, I may owe more than her and have to make up the difference somewhere to make it equitable, because we use marital assets to pay down my separate debt. Okay, that can get complicated. I give you the statutes to show you basically that we basically want it to be equal distribution, but we can't because it's too hard to be equal. There's too many factors. We look at all these factors about what makes something equitable. I put them in here for you, by the way. This is all in here. Fault's usually not a factor. So, but some states do allow fault to be considered in terms of how much is distributed. I mean, how do you deal with appreciation of assets? You'll see some crazy complicated issues on things like appreciation assets, especially when you have stock market fluctuation between the date of separation and the date of your hearing in court, where let's say I was entitled to half of $100,000 at the date of separation, but today those same assets, stock share for stock share, is now worth $200,000. Do I get to share in the additional, or do I not? But that's easier than if it's the other way and it's a loss. Then you can shift the loss heavier to one person than the other. It's kind of interesting. You'll see those kinds of things. A quadro is key, and when you have pension plans, a quadro, because you know what a pension, you're not entitled to the money today, you're only entitled to it tomorrow, or when you hit retirement. So a quadro is a qualified domestic relations order. It's a special order that goes to your defined benefit, to your pension plan, that distributes the share you will receive that and represents the marital property, considering that most people are married and then they continue to work for that employer. So after the marriage, that retirement contribution is no longer marital property. That's confusing as crap, but that's what quadros are. Okay, they get complicated. How do you split up the cost of a degree? How do you split up a business interest, right? I know people who have ex-wives and ex-husbands who are partners in the family business. Now that's a pleasant deal, isn't it? Debts, taxes, wills, insurance, all that stuff. Legal expenses can be distributed, basically one side can require the other to pay. Okay? Wow, I feel like I really went fast at the end. All right, any questions about that stuff? All right, I'm going to give you an assignment that it deals with spouse support and property distribution. You already probably figured that. And I will put that in Blackboard for you. See you next time.